Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today at the webinar entitled Addressing the Growing Threat of Cyber Attack. All ends lead to the endpoint. Excuse me, all roads lead to the endpoint. There we go. Got the title right this time. I'm your host, Microsoft MVP and former MSP owner, Nick Cavalancia. Today's topic revolves around the fact that in almost every cyber attack, no matter what the type it is, inevitably there's a need for the threat actor to compromise an endpoint in some way, shape, or form, whether we're talking about a foothold, they're moving laterally, they're trying to spread ransomware, whatever the case is, it doesn't matter. There's always an endpoint involved in some way, shape, or form. And at the same time, so for all of you, when you're trying to figure out how to enhance your cybersecurity service offerings that you have, you're trying to think about ways of how do you improve the cybersecurity that you're providing your customers, while at the same time lowering the cost of doing so. And so in today's webcast, we're going to take a look at how that's accomplished. And I have two great speakers today. I'm going to introduce them separately a little bit first here to educate you on how you can accomplish this. The first is Rob Allen. He is the VP of Operations at ThreatLocker. Rob, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Nick. Pleasure to be here.
Glad you're here. We're also joined by Shane Deegan. He's the MSP sales manager over at ThreatLocker as well. Shane, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate the introduction. Just a word of warning: you will hear two very thick rogues on the on the call. I can assure you we are a US-based company, though, so get that out of the way straight away.
Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, say no more. Okay, good. So a couple of housekeeping items here real quickly. Today's webinar, of course, is being recorded. And if you'd like to get a link for it, you'll be receiving that via email in a couple of days. Everyone that attends gets that. Also, if you have any questions throughout today's webcast, use the Q&A button. The chat is actually for you all to talk amongst yourselves, although I'll be checking that just in case you put it in the wrong spot. But try to use the Q&A box if you can, and we'll put questions at the end. We'll probably have a 10-minute time frame or so just to handle formal Q&A. And I think that's about it as far as I've got. So with that, Rob, I think I'm just going to hand the floor to you. So if you're ready to go ahead and take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Can I just ask, do I need to do anything in terms of sharing screen, or is my screen shared?
No, I can see your screen perfectly.
Fantastic. Well, as I said, thank you very much. And we shall begin. So first thing we want to talk about really is, who are we fighting against? Okay, we are fighting a fight. And the question is, who are we fighting against? Now, once upon a time, who we were fighting against could probably be safely described as amateurs. It was hackers. It was people playing around. I mean, once upon a time, hacker was not a bad term. It was actually a compliment. So if somebody said, hey, you're a hacker, that was actually a good thing once upon a time, not so much anymore. So the question of who are our adversaries is an important one. So fundamentally, what we're talking about these days is gangs, is sophisticated businesses, and is also nation states. Now, you could probably include gangs and sophisticated businesses under one umbrella, because fundamentally these gangs are sophisticated businesses. Okay, the likes of Lapsus, who took down Opta, the likes of DarkSide, who went after Colonial Pipeline, and Conti, they are sophisticated businesses. They have hierarchies, they have support departments, they have, you name it, they've got it. Okay, so as I said, these gangs are very much sophisticated businesses. The Conti in particular are a very interesting case, because as you may have guessed, I'm from Ireland. They took down our National Health Service middle of last year. Now, in the middle of a global pandemic, they basically wiped out 95% of our infrastructure. Vaccinations were going on at the time. Basically, people were reduced to using pens and paper in the middle of a global pandemic. Not content with that, they then went after the Costa Rican government. Okay, and that's a really interesting case. If you have a look at why they picked on Costa Rica, I actually don't know. But for some reason, they literally went after the Costa Rican government. But as I said, the point is, fundamentally, these gangs are sophisticated businesses, and they're probably better equipped, better able to do what they do than, in a lot of cases, we are. And I say we, the general we. But again, back to the question of what is hacking. Hacking fundamentally means solving a problem. Okay, so hackers, generally speaking, are problem solvers. Now, as I said, back in the day, the problems that they used to solve typically were not malicious. They were not that damaging. It was things like the Lovebug virus. where basically you got it sent it out to a load of people saying, I love you. You clicked on it and it sent it out to a load more people saying, I loved you. They weren't really that malicious. They weren't that damaging. But nowadays, the problem that they're solving fundamentally is how to take money out of your and your clients' pockets. So it's the same problem solvers solving a different problem these days. And as I said, that problem is now how to take money out of your and your clients' pockets. How they're doing that, there's a variety of different ways that they're doing that, okay? And what we're going to sort of focus in on a little bit today is exploited software. So software vulnerabilities, okay? CVEs. Last year, there was 21,000 CVEs. Okay, this year, so far, there's been almost 20,000. So we're on course to beat last year's record in terms of vulnerabilities. Now, the vulnerabilities range from, you know, who cares? Realistically, it's not going to cause a problem. It's not something that can be exploited or is going to be exploited, to, this is a major issue. Okay, and just to give you some examples of the major issues that there have been over the last year, we're talking about things like SolarWinds. Okay, the SolarWinds Orion attack. Okay, now it's a really interesting one because as part of that Orion attack, it was effectively a supply chain attack. But what they did was they utilized an external command and control server. Okay, that external command and control server was located in New Jersey, and because people fundamentally implicitly trusted those agents, those SolarWinds ORMM agents, those SolarWinds ORMM agents were able to communicate with that external command and control server. Now, obviously, they put it in New Jersey because they didn't want to put it in Russia because people might notice traffic going to a Russian IP address. But the fact of the matter is, it was able to, or those agents were able to communicate with a completely unrelated separate server that realistically they had no business in being able to connect to. And one of the tenets or principles of zero trust is to remove implicit trust. Okay, so just because you need to run SolarWinds doesn't mean you need to implicitly trust SolarWinds agent to do whatever it wants and go whatever it wants. The next vulnerability we're going to speak about is the Exchange vulnerability. Now, we have some really interesting examples on this of servers that were exploited using the Exchange vulnerability. Last I heard, I think there was something in the region of about 600,000 machines, 600,000 servers that were attacked and exploited as part of that vulnerability. It took Microsoft quite some time to patch it, okay? And it took even longer for organizations that are using it to apply those patches, okay? So there's two parts to this. There's the, okay, this thing is out there, it's getting attacked. The vendor has to fix the problem. And it will take the vendor a period of time to fix the problem. But once the vendor has fixed the problem and released the patch, you then have the problem of organizations, whether it be MSPs or enterprises, actually applying that patch. On average, there's 34 days between a patch being released and a patch being applied. Okay, and that's 34 days that this thing is actively being exploited. And the fact is, Exchange is particularly terrifying and scary because Exchange servers have bits hanging out on the internet. It is their very nature. They have to have ports exposed to the internet. And once something is exposed to the internet and has a vulnerability, it is going to be exploited. So as I said, 600,000 businesses were affected by that Exchange vulnerability. ORMM agents, okay, or ORMM issues or vulnerabilities in ORMM. I mean, we'll speak about the I suppose, the gorilla in the room. The big one last year was the Kaseya attack. Again, really good example of where these guys are focusing their attention. So it's a supply chain attack. They went after somebody upstream from MSPs. So why would you go after one single lone MSP who's got a couple of thousand seats under their management? If you can go after a Kaseya who supplies software to all of these MSPs, you're multiplying the number of potential victims exponentially. So they reckon that Kaseya attack affected 100,000 machines. So they got in to Kaseya, pushed something out using Kaseya's ORMM software, and 100,000 machines basically got wiped out as part of that attack. Next thing we're going to mention is Print Nightmare. Print Nightmare was a really interesting one, and it's another great example of Microsoft's, how do I put this diplomatically? This is being recorded, so it's another great example of Microsoft's being a little bit slow to the party in terms of patching vulnerabilities. Now, Printheimer is actually really interesting. There was proof of concepts going around of it, and I've actually seen it in operation. And we'll speak to ThreatLocker in a few moments, but I've seen it in operation in environments that both have and don't have ThreatLocker. But in environments that don't have, effectively what happens is a DLL file gets remotely dropped on a system using a vulnerability in the print spooler. That DLL file can also be, or is also, remotely executed using the print spooler. Print spooler on a machine being used to execute effectively code. So it was a really interesting one. It was a really bloody dangerous one. Next thing I'm going to mention is, and I'm going to show you this example in a moment, Felena, the Office vulnerability. Now, the Felena vulnerability and exploitation of the Felena vulnerability was particularly scary and particularly worrying. And the reason for that is it was a zero-click vulnerability. Okay, you didn't have to enable macros. You didn't have to do anything once you'd opened a document. It's not as if you had to click on a link or a dodgy link within the document for that exploit to take place. You literally opened a document and things happened. And I'll show you in a moment what happened or how those things did happen. And the last of which to mention is the Log4j. Now, I'm sure you're all tired of hearing about Log4j, but the reason Log4j was so scary was scale. Okay, Log4j, it is estimated where it was installed on up to 3 billion devices. Okay, 3 billion devices were effectively vulnerable to that vulnerability. Now, the issue was it wasn't a simple release a patch and push it out, okay? Because Log4j was used by thousands and thousands and thousands of different vendors as part of their own packages. So I've seen it in things like, say, UPS control software using Log4j. As an example, Minecraft, I believe, used Log4j. So you have hundreds of different vendors or thousands of different vendors, all of which have to independently implement a fix for Log4j, but you're also depending on those vendors being around. In a lot of cases, they aren't even around anymore. So it could be software from 5-10 years ago. That vendor doesn't even exist. How are they going to fix that vulnerability or fix that issue? So Log4j is probably the most dangerous one. I mean, I've heard it described as an endemic vulnerability. So it is one that is not going away anytime soon. That could potentially be around and being exploited for years. As I mentioned, 21,000 vulnerabilities in commonly used software. I mean, to be honest, it would be more unusual for software to not have holes, not have vulnerabilities, not have things that are being actively exploited. I mean, if you work from a principle of my software that I use every day has vulnerabilities, you'll be far better off. But to Felena, okay, it was about, I think it was about 2 or 3 months ago now, okay? Everyone's having a conversation about macros, okay? Obviously, macros are not a good idea. And in most cases, okay, malware distribution via Office has had to use macros in some degree, or to some extent. Felena doesn't need macros, okay? We did a proof of concept. Okay, I'm going to show you what that looks like now in a second. It took us 20 minutes to create a proof of concept to download and execute a payload using that Felena vulnerability. Okay, I'm going to show you a video for now, but 20 minutes from start to finish. Just to explain a little bit though, a Word document, I don't know if anyone has ever looked inside a docx file. I know prior to Felena, I had never looked inside a docx file, but if you do, it's quite interesting. You can extract it like you can with any zip file. And if you extract it, you will see what's inside it is effectively a folder structure. So you got a bunch of folders and a bunch of separate files in there. Most of them are XML files. But the point is those XML files can be edited and they all do different things as part of what the document opens. So you can actually change the XML file to point to, for example, PowerShell, which is what we actually did in our demonstration video. So you'll see here now what it looks like. So the document opens, okay, and as I said, you will notice there are no further clicks required. Okay, program compatibility troubleshooter opens, okay, or is immediately triggered to open. And this is when, as I said, the fun stuff happens. Now I'm going to show you what the inside of the document looks like in a moment, but effectively what happens is PowerShell is now being called. PowerShell is now going out to download a payload and it's going to execute the payload. Okay, that's how easy this vulnerability was to exploit. Okay, 20 minutes of our playing with it, editing some XML files, putting a PowerShell script together to download and execute a payload, and exploitation happened. So bear with me a second. Okay, that is an example of basically what is happening inside. So as I said, you can extract any Office file using something like 7-zip. You have a structure and you can basically embed a malicious payload into those XML files. Okay, the example you just saw is to download and execute payloads. But I mean, that could be something else. It could be data exfiltration, for example. Okay, again, and I'll give you a couple of examples of data exfiltration and how scary and how worrying that is in a moment. The point is, these threat actors, these bad guys are using these vulnerabilities to make money. Okay, so coming back to our original point about what hackers are doing these days, it is that they are using their skills to make money. Okay, so running a lot of remote code, like we just showed you, downloading and executing a payload, could be for running a crypto miner on a machine. Now, I know the value of Bitcoin has dropped somewhat, but still, I mean, it's somewhere about $20,000. You get a couple of hundred machines, you got your own little botnet going. Okay, so again, don't underestimate the ingenuity of these guys to make money basically off the back of these vulnerabilities. 11 seconds. You might wonder where this figure comes from, but every 11 seconds, a business is hit by ransomware. Every 11 seconds, somewhere in the world, somebody is turning on a computer to find out that their data is gone. I can give you, I work for, full disclosure, and I know you're not going to believe this, but I worked for an MSP for 18 years. So I've seen every type of ransomware attack you can possibly care to mention over the course of those 18 years. Probably personally been involved in the cleanup of maybe somewhere between 10 and 15 ransomware attacks. Give you one example, and this is just one that is particularly relevant or particularly interesting. The last one that I was involved in the cleanup for, prior to coming to work for ThreatLocker, it was the scariest one, and I'll explain why. So basically, our biggest customer, the MSP's biggest customer, they had a couple of hundred seats. I got a phone call from a finance guy there one morning at 8 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, we can't get into our files. Can you have a look? And this guy always rang me early in the morning. They always had some problem, okay? But I logged in, I could see straight away from their RMM tool, something weird was going on. So I could see odd logins to servers with accounts that I'd never seen before. So I knew something was up, managed to get in, figured out what was going on, shut it down relatively quickly, okay? Basically, they had something like 10 servers, 2 of them got wiped out by the time I got to shut it down. They were actually really lucky, okay, because it had been kicked off at was effectively 2 a.m. US time. Okay, they had a US arm as well, and the US arm got wiped out. I'll get to that in a moment, but Irish time, basically, it was 5 hours ahead. So it was actually 7 o'clock in the morning when it got kicked off. As I said, I got made aware of it really quickly. I was able to get logged in, shut it down. We as an MSP were looking for or looking after or responsible for the Irish part of the operation. Okay, so the Irish part of the operation that we looked after had AV, had big firewalls next year on the perimeter of the network. Problem was, though, they had VPNs to 4 or 5 different locations. So they VPN to an office in the US, they VPN to an office in Canada, they VPN to an office in the UK as well. And it was actually through Canada that this thing got in. Okay, it was an unpatched 2008 server, not running any AV. Okay, they'd somehow got into that server. Basically, they figured it was compromised credentials. So somebody had lost their credentials or given away their credentials by mistake. Bad guys dropped the ransomware on that server in Canada. Okay, ran the ransomware. As I said, US got wiped out. But then they obviously discovered or figured out that there was more stuff across this VPN here, not here in Ireland, there in Ireland. So they got into the servers in Ireland as well. When they were in the servers in Ireland, I could see this all from the logs. What they did was they tried to run the ransomware across the network, so across that VPN. As soon as they did, ESET, which is the AV, kicked in. Okay, stopped the ransomware from running. Now, again, and I could see all of this through the logs. When they did that, or when they saw that, they literally stopped ESET, restarted the server, ran the ransomware. Took them all of 3 minutes to get around the protections that that company had in place. 3 minutes to effectively sidestep the security and ran the ransomware. The scary thing, or the different thing, and I'll speak to this in a moment, but the scary thing about this attack and why it was different to everyone that I'd seen previously was because of the ransom note that was left behind. So as I said, 2 servers wiped out. We got them back up from a backup. That was fine. The scary thing was the ransom note. And the first line of the ransom note went, "We have uploaded 1.3 terabytes of your data. If you don't pay us by this date at this time, we are going to start releasing it." Now, I'd never seen that before. Okay, I'd seen all the ransom notes. I'd seen that we've encrypted your stuff, pay us Bitcoin, or you're not getting your stuff back. Okay, bored seeing them. This one with the "we have stolen your data" was terrifying, not only for me as an MSP, but also for the customer, because they were asking the perfectly legitimate and reasonable question, well, do they have our stuff? And the short answer is, I couldn't answer a very reasonable question. I didn't know how much or if any of their data had been uploaded. But that's the bit that terrified the customer. That's the bit that made that customer contemplate paying the ransom, was the thought that their data was out there. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's just going to be leaked or released on the dark web. It doesn't matter if it's going to be sold to a competitor. It doesn't matter if it's just going to be released just to cause embarrassment. The fear of that, the fear of fines, the GDPR implications. I mean, I think it's 2% of global revenue you can be fined as part of GDPR. I'm sure you guys, Shane, you can correct me here, but I'm sure there's similar regulations here in terms of data protection and fines. But they were terrified, and that was the bit that scared them. It wasn't, can we get back up and running again? Because we had them back up and running again within, I think, 14 or 15 hours. It was the, do they have our data? And as I said, I couldn't answer that question.
I actually read up on a story about a few months back about a couple of public schools or private schools being hit in the UK. And what happened is they actually got access to their insurance documents. So they knew exactly how much they were insured for. So the letter went out that we know you're insured for $500,000. The ransom is $500,000. Pay it by this date, or all the students' data gets leaked. What happened is the school went to an incident response firm who it was, I can't think of the name of the gang now, Hive. It was the Hive ransomware gang, who were notorious for not giving data back even when the ransom was paid. So the IR firm said, look, we recommend you don't pay the ransom, don't negotiate, there's no guarantee getting your data back. So when they refused to negotiate, they hadn't told the parents of all the students. And so what they did is they said it was an IT outage. So when they refused to negotiate, the gang actually emailed directly all the parents saying, hey, we got little Jimmy's information, we have your information, everything goes live on dark web in 2 weeks' time, unless the school hasn't notified you what's going on. I don't know what happened afterwards, but I can imagine with the pressure from a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand parents on their kids' data, you're backed into a corner there at that stage. More often than not, you're going to have to pay. Just even whether you get it back or not, you can't explain that to the end user. You can't explain it to the person whose data has been stolen. They don't care. They pay whatever needs to be paid and then deal with it. So,
but this is the thing. And even if you want to do that, though, Shane, nowadays paying is illegal. So you're breaking the law by paying. Okay, so I mean, you're basically in a catch-22. If you pay, you're breaking the law. If you don't pay, they could, as I said, it could be releasing it from embarrassment. It could be selling it to competitors. Realistically, they don't care. The other danger, and again, I'll speak to this in a few minutes, but the other danger is even if you pay, as you mentioned, you're dealing with criminals. Okay, they're not necessarily going to give you your data back. Would you trust them to give your data back? Even if they do, okay, if you pay, how do you know they're going to delete it? Okay, and I actually have another slide about a company that do some research on this subject in a moment. But again, you can't trust these guys. Next thing I want to mention just very briefly, I know we spoke about gangs and sophisticated businesses and nation states earlier. Another really interesting development over the last number of years, and again, you guys are more aware than most about the prevalence of software as a service, how pretty much everything these days is software as a service. What is becoming more and more prevalent now is ransomware as a service. Okay, there's certain places you go to on the dark web and you can basically buy ransomware as a service. Thing about it is, once upon a time, to be a purveyor of ransomware, you needed skills. Okay, you needed knowledge, you needed to be able to code. These days, all you need is bad intentions. Okay, and the willingness to give up a slice of the profit. So basically, with these ransomware as a service operators, they take like 10, 20% of the proceeds, you take the rest. So think about it, disgruntled employees, okay, somebody within your organizations or your customers' organizations. All they need is bad intentions and the willingness to go onto the onto the dark web and find these guys, and you can buy ransomware as a service. We did a presentation not too long ago on this subject, and when we mentioned the possibility of getting ransomware as a service, somebody actually approached our speaker after the event and asked them where he could get. It was a 14-year-old kid, okay? And he asked the speaker, where can I get this ransomware as a service? And needless to say, we didn't tell him. But the fact is, it is out there and it is purchasable and available to anybody with bad intentions. This is the slide I mentioned a second ago, okay, about specifically about the thing about leaking exfiltrated data. So almost 80% of ransomware attacks involve the threat to leak exfiltrated data. Okay, so it's not about we've encrypted your stuff anymore. It's about we've stolen your stuff and we're going to encrypt your stuff. That attack I mentioned on the Irish Health Service, the HSE, last year, they released 520 people's personal medical information online. Their personal medical information was released online as part of that attack, and in an effort to get the HSE to pay. So imagine that. Imagine your personal medical information being released online. Okay, but as part of a ransomware attack. But as you can see, the data will not be credibly destroyed. Okay, you can't trust these guys. Even if they say they're going to, how do you know if they do? How do you know if they've stored it in somewhere safe? How do you know nobody else has had access to it? How do you know somebody else hasn't taken a copy of it? Okay, and even if you do pay, they're going to basically mark you as somebody who pays. So they may well double dip. So they can come back in 6 months and say, hey, by the way, I know you paid the last time, and I know we said we deleted your stuff. We didn't actually delete your stuff. Okay, pay us more, or we're going to release that online. So you have no ability to depend on these guys to delete the data when it's gone. The point is, stop them from getting it in the first place. But as you can see, ransomware attacks still disproportionately affect small businesses, okay? And on average, you're looking at about 23 days of downtime. That disproportionately affects small businesses looks like this. So as you can see, businesses of 1 to 10 people are responsible for 4.9% of ransomware attacks. 101 to 1,000, nearly 36% of ransomware attacks. And from 11 to 100, 32.3. So nearly 70% of ransomware attacks are businesses of up to 1,000 people in size. So it disproportionately affects small businesses. Talk about insurance, and I'm actually going to give you an example from my own background on this. Company I used to work for, without naming any names, they got themselves into a bit of a pickle. A customer of theirs got themselves into a bit of a pickle a while ago. And what happened was they looked after legal firms, basically. And one of the legal firms, the main guy, email got phished. So somebody got access to his account. They then used his email account to send an email to his accounts person saying, hey, I need you to send money to here, to X. Money got sent. Okay, now, obviously not a good idea to send money on foot of an email, but fact is money got sent. Substantial amount of money. Okay. They then money's gone. Okay, fundamentally. They then went to the insurance company pretty much and said, look, you going to cover this for us? And insurance company said, no, we're not. This is effectively negligence. You just sent money on against all advice. Otherwise, you just sent money on foot of an email. And that MSP is currently and has been being sued because of this incident. Now, the reason they're being sued is because the customer, the legal firm, is saying, you didn't give us the best advice. You didn't tell us we needed two-factor authentication. Now, there had been conversations between the MSP and the customer saying, hey, you really should have a two-factor authentication, but there was nothing in writing. Okay, so they had nothing on paper to show that they'd given that advice that you should have two-factor authentication. That is currently making its way through the courts system in Ireland. It's probably going to end up as a precedent case as to whether or not people can actually pin the blame on MSPs for events like this. Okay, but the point is, insurance have taken notice. Insurance companies know what's going on. And you've probably seen cybersecurity insurance. Number one, it's a lot more expensive than it used to be. And number two, it's a lot harder than it used to be to get. So the underwriting is more rigorous and more intense. They're asking a lot more questions. And again, I know this because a customer of both mine previously and mine now actually asked for my advice on how to fill in a cyber insurance form. I did them years ago for these guys, and it'd be like 4 or 5 questions. Do you have a firewall? Do you have antivirus? Do you have local admin accounts? Nowadays, there's about 15, 20, 25 boxes that you need to tick with all of the different tools and systems that you have in place and controls that you have in place. And if you don't have them, they are going to load your insurance. I'm sure you guys know professional indemnity insurance, even apart from cyber insurance, PI is harder and harder to get. So insurance is a big thing. Some of the, depending on the industries you support, there's more and more regulations, okay, and compliance requirements to navigate every year. Okay, so I'm not going to list all these things out. You can see them on the screen, okay, but there's more and more different compliance regulations that businesses need to navigate depending on what area they're in. So the question then becomes, how do we solve the problem? Okay, how do we solve the problem of ransomware? And the point is, ransomware is just software, okay? It's written in the same languages as ordinary software is. So everything from C, C++, C#, Java, Python. I mean, they're just languages, okay? And ransomware is written using those same languages. The only thing is it's bad code rather than good code, but fundamentally it is just code. This is how we have historically, shall we say, tried to solve the problem. So everything from AV to threat hunters to EDR to ransomware detection to AI, EDR, MDR, XDR, anything that's got a DNR in the title. Okay, this is the way that we've tried to solve this problem. Okay, but fundamentally, they are all detection. They're all about identifying bad things and hopefully stopping them. Okay, so they are all detection tools. But what we find very often is that people load up on these detection tools. So they might have 2 or 3 or 4 different layers of detection, fundamentally all looking for the same bad things, all trying to identify the same threats. Okay, but the point is, and again, if you decompile ransomware, you'll find parts of the code on Stack Overflow. That's how common it is. I mean, again, encryption in itself is not a bad thing, but can it be used for bad things? Absolutely. Sorry, which slide am I on? Oh, I got lost there for a second. So just want to identify and sort of leading on from that last slide we mentioned a second ago, all those different technologies, all those different detection tools that people use. This concept of a security triangle, okay, and where people focus their attention. On the left-hand side of this security triangle, you have all of those detection tools we just mentioned. So MDRs, EDRs, threat hunters, AVs, anti-spams, everything else, okay? They, as I said, are all detection. They're all about identifying the bad things. They're fundamentally like the alarms in your house to alert you and hopefully shut it down when something bad is happening, okay? You also have security awareness training. Security awareness training is fundamental. It is absolutely critical to solving this problem because users realistically are the weakest link. They are always the weakest link and they will always be the weakest link. So if you can educate your users, if you can make sure Dorison Accounts does not click on that link, you're going to be far better off. But you can't depend just on that, much like you can't depend just on detection. Where ThreatLocker comes in is on the controls side of the equation. Okay, so we basically offer and introduce controls into the equation. Now, the beauty about this is controls complement detection. Okay, they're not doing the same thing. So we can't be, or we shouldn't be compared to other detection tools. We're fundamentally not playing the same game. So we are rules, we are absolutes, we are yes and no's, we are binary decisions fundamentally about whether things are allowed or not, but it's based on rules, okay, policies, controls. It's not about making decisions about what is good and what is bad. But as I said, both approaches are very much complementary. They're not at war with each other. We offer controls, they offer detection, okay? And a good balance of control and detection, it could be argued, is the cornerstone of a well-balanced security stack. So as I said, don't load up only on detection, also consider some of those controls. Now, the controls that we offer, okay, and it's fundamentally, it's quite simple, okay, which is allow what needs to run and block everything else. So it's been called many things down through the years. It's been called allow listing. It's been called whitelisting. It's been called default deny. You can probably think of another 3 or 4 different descriptions for it. But fundamentally, the idea is that let what needs to run and block everything else, okay? Not just ransomware, okay? Not just malware, any unwanted software, okay? And that's really important. Yes, obviously just yes, obviously ransomware, but block anything that you don't want to be able to run from running. Give you an example of, and this is why not just malware is important. I worked with a partner recently, and they wanted us to work with a partner of theirs to basically convince them as to why they needed ThreatLocker. So they installed it, pushed it out to 170 machines, and we basically just let it learn, had it sitting there for a couple of weeks. Now, one of the things we offer is full visibility, okay, logging of everything that happens in the environment. What was happening in this environment was, and I focused in on this with the partner to see what was going on. We focused in on remote access tools, okay, because remote access tools fundamentally are a way into your and your customer's network. In this particular environment of 170 machines, there was 6 different remote access tools in play, 6 different remote access tools running on that network, okay? Not just sitting there, not just lying around, running on that network. So that's 6 different ways that somebody who could have got in. The really scary thing was 33 of those machines, right? Nearly 20% of the machines in that environment were running TeamViewer, okay? That company did not use TeamViewer. There was no genuine business reason for TeamViewer to be installed on those people's machines. It had probably been installed years ago by some third party who needed access to a machine. But the nature of it is that somebody's allowed to run this, they install it on their machine, and it sits there forever as I said, a potential way into their network. Okay, but 6 different remote access tools. By the way, one of the remote access tools that was still running on multiple computers in that organization was the previous MSP's remote access tool. So not the current MSP who I was working with, the last MSP's remote access tool and agent was still installed and running on 2 of the machines in that particular environment. So that shows why it's not just about stopping bad things, because I mean, fundamentally, something like TeamViewer is not going to be found or stopped by an EDR or an AB or anything else. But do you want unapproved remote access tools to be able to run on every machine you manage? Absolutely not. So that's why allow listing, block everything that hasn't been explicitly allowed is such an effective way of protecting yourselves and your customers. Now, how we do this, it's relatively simple. Okay, you basically deploy an agent, let it learn. It's not going to block anything, not going to stop anything, not going to interfere with anything from happening. Okay, it's literally just going to sit there and log data. Now, what we do with that data is we create rules, we create policies based on what we see as being present in the environment. Okay, so if you use Acrobat, you use Zoom, you use Teams, we're going to see all of those pieces of software running, and we're going to automatically create policies to allow those software or pieces of software to continue to run once ThreatLocker has been enabled. Okay, we go through what we call the audit review process. Audit review process is basically where our solutions engineers go through audits, which is everything that's happened. But the beauty about the audit review process is we can focus in on the things that prior to securing would have been denied had ThreatLocker been enabled. So nothing is getting blocked at that stage, but we have effectively what we call simulated denies. So we can see, instead of the 100,000 things that happen in the environment, we might see the 50 things that would have been denied if ThreatLocker was turned on. And we can tweak and adjust policies as need be. one thing you can see in that screen as well, the concept of built-in applications. Built-in applications are kind of the secret sauce as to why ThreatLocker is as easy and manageable as it is, okay? And it's the old problem with allow listing or whitelisting of what happens when things update. And typically what happens when things update is they will break, because your allow listing tool will go, look, I know that file is called acrobat.exe, but it doesn't match my hash for acrobat.exe, so therefore I'm not going to let it run, okay? And that has always been the problem. And the way we solve that problem for our customers is via this concept of built-in applications, which is the database of well over 2,000 common applications that we track, monitor, and catalog when they update. The way I describe it is basically allow listing has only really been the purview of massive organizations, multinationals, corporations, governments, that sort of scale of operation. And it's because realistically you needed a team of 10 or 15 people working 24/7, 365 to keep on top of updates. The point is, we do have a team of 10 or 15 people working 24. I think it's actually 30 people now, if I'm not much mistaken.
Up to about 30. God bless them. It's literally one person's job to walk in every day and download every version of QuickBooks. So you don't have to.
Absolutely. But again, the point is we do have those people working 24/7, 365 to keep on top of those updates. But again, we're doing it for all of our customers' benefits. And as I said, it's kind of the secret sauce as to why it is, relatively speaking, as easy to manage as it is. Attacks that live off the land. This is something that's really interesting. And this is the concept that we call ring fencing. Okay, so application control from our perspective has two parts. You've got the what can run and what can't run, which is allow listing. You've then got the, okay, these things can run, what can they do? Okay, now it's very rarely for ransomware just to magically appear in an environment. Okay, there's normally something that is used or leveraged to get it in. It's very rare that things like, say, for example, a Cobalt Strike Beacon, it doesn't just appear in your network. Okay, it's normally a PowerShell or remotely executed PowerShell command that's used to deploy that thing. So if you can control those tools, those things that live off the land, I mean, your PowerShells, your reg serves, your run DLLs, and limit what they can do, where they can go on the internet and what data they can access, you're going to massively reduce your attack surface. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. We use rubber duckies as part of our presentations, and there's a bit of a joke that we make when we're doing our presentations, because we have a rubber ducky loaded with a PowerShell command, a data exfiltration PowerShell command. Okay, so you plug it into a machine and it will steal your data. Now, the joke that we make as part of our presentations is, look, this is a data exfiltration rubber ducky. It will steal your data. If you think your current cybersecurity tool will stop it from stealing your data, come talk to us at the booth. We'll plug it into your computer. If you win, you get to keep the rubber ducky. If we win, we get to keep your data. And everybody kind of laughs and they go, that's very funny. There's no way you're actually plugging that into my computer. But I was at an event in the Middle East recently. Okay, and by the time I got back to the booth, there was a guy standing there saying, I want you to plug that into my computer. So I was like, okay, I'll plug it into your computer. So plugged it into his computer. 10 seconds later, I could see all of his files sitting on our Google Blob storage. Now, what he thought was going to stop it from happening, I have no idea. Now, I have to confess, we didn't keep his data. We did delete it, but we certainly got his data. Okay, and as I said, it's a one-line PowerShell command. On the subject of which, I had a call about 2 weeks ago with a prospect, and the prospect used a very common and very well-known EDR tool. And I asked him, just as a matter of interest, how he found it. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it easy to manage? Do you like it? Do you not like it? And he said, look, it's fine. The problem is false positives. Okay, I spend all day chasing false positives. It's basically like the boy who cried wolf. This thing is going wolf over here and wolf over there and wolf over there. And I spent all day chasing these things, and there's never anything there. There's never anything happening. Okay. Now, when I was doing our demonstration, and we actually used that data exfiltration script as part of our demonstration and showing how and why we stop these things, he said, do you mind if I run that tool, that script, on my machine running said EDR? So I said, absolutely no problem. Go right ahead. I will give you the command. So he ran the command on his machine, running said well-known and famous EDR tool, not a peep out of the EDR. Okay, data got exfiltrated, no problem at all. EDR didn't even register what was happening. And it speaks to the difficulty of making those decisions about what is good and bad behavior, because is PowerShell going through your documents folder and uploading the contents to Google Blob Storage good or bad? I mean, in some contexts, it's good. I mean, it might be something you want to be able to happen, but in some contexts, it's very much bad. Okay. And making those judgment calls, those decisions about what is good and bad is no easy feat. As I said, blocking things like Office from talking to PowerShell, okay, is really important. And that is one of the tenets or one of the fundamentals about ring fencing, is stopping those application interactions. That first stage of many of these attacks, which is, look, Outlook calls PowerShell, PowerShell goes out and downloads a payload or runs remote code, or whatever the case may be. So if you can stop that initial interaction between those programs, you're going to stop that attack in the bud. As I said, things like PowerShell. Does PowerShell need to access your files and folders? Realistically, I don't think it does. And in 99.9% of environments, it does not. So if it doesn't need to access your files and folders, block it from accessing your files and folders. Administrative permissions, okay? So what needs to run as a local admin? Very often, there's two reasons or two ways that people get local admin on their machines. And well, to be honest, fundamentally, there's really one, which is this application needs to run as a local admin. So therefore, I'm going to leave you as a local admin. Another confession, company I used to work for, they had a piece of software, which they'd written themselves, which needed local admin rights, okay? They basically, the first thing that we used to do when we were setting up a new computer for a customer was set them up as a local admin, because this thing needs to run as a local admin. Really not a good idea, but there was very little they could do about it. Another confession, the other thing, or the second thing we had to do when we were setting it up, was they used, or their software basically used Word to generate documents based on templates. So the second thing we had to do when we were setting up a new computer is enable macros in Office. Really not a good idea, but they didn't have a better solution. Okay, so local admin rights, macros in Office. Now, that company now uses ThreatLocker. Okay, so they set that application to be elevatable. They can take away those local admin rights, and they can also stop Office. So even though macros are enabled, you can stop those macros from calling things like PowerShell. Okay, and you can stop it from accessing your files. So administrative privileges, take away those local admin rights from users. I mean, everybody has got somebody in their organization who has local admin rights but shouldn't. Okay, take away those local admin rights and make it easy for them to request access. So if they need to run something as a local admin, let them run as a local admin. If they don't let them. Storage control. Okay, storage control it can be split into two sections, and I am conscious of time, so I'm going to try, and I know I've spoken a lot. Very simple, control over devices. Okay, things like USB drives. A lot of organizations don't have any controls over USB drives. Those that do, generally speaking, are doing things like GPOs. GPOs are a nightmare to administer, okay? You've very little granularity. It's basically like a light switch for an organization. It's either on or it's off, so you can use drives or you can't. Not very practical in most organizations, okay? So having granular controls where you can say, okay, this machine can use that drive, or allow JPEG files to be copied off but not on, or don't let Word documents be copied on. You can get really granular with those controls. So that's access to storage devices. Where storage control starts getting really interesting is controlling what programs, what individual applications have access to your data. Okay, if you think about it, your traditional approach to storage has always been user permissions, okay, user ACL. So Rob has access to that folder. Problem with that approach is everything Rob runs has access to that folder, including ransomware. It's one of the reasons that ransomware is so as prevalent as it is. So if you can restrict, default deny for data and programs, if you can restrict what programs have access to your important files and data, you're going to restrict the potential, number one, for damage from things like ransomware, but number two, for data exfiltration. Okay, so if, again, PowerShell, command prompt, things like that can't get out your files, how are they going to data exfiltrate? Like, if only Office can access that folder, you're going to open every single Word document in Word and save it somewhere else? That's going to take you a while. Okay, it's not just a single command. So again, controlling access to files and storage and data, limiting to specific applications. Another very quick couple of examples, things like SQL databases. Okay, why would anything other than SQL Server need to access a SQL database? Doesn't. So block everything but SQL Server from accessing SQL database. Hyper-V, VMs, okay? If only Hyper-V needs to access its VMs, then only let it access its VMs and block everything else. There's a million different ways that you can use storage control.
Even to speak a little bit on insider threats as well. obviously either
Absolutely.
uploading some malware, but even on another note, what I've seen numerous times is, so you have an employee who's been promoted over, didn't get the raise he wants or whatever it be, and decides in his opinion, oh, well, you know, I can set up my own MSP. All of a sudden they're exfiltrating lead lists, they're exfiltrating pricing matrices, contracts, all that kind of stuff onto USB drive. We've seen that countless times at this stage. So don't overlook, you know, that insider threat comes within.
Yeah, very good point, Ed. Interestingly enough, I did a panel one time with a lady from a school, and her major worry was not the bad guys on the outside trying to get in. It was the kids, the young people in the school that were her major threat. So she basically had bad guys out there and 15,000 potential bad guys on the inside. So that idea of internal threats is not just organizations, it's not just businesses, it is also things like schools as well. Network access control. Okay, so what's the biggest challenge securing your network? I mean, fundamentally, there is no network. Okay, one thing that COVID brought about was the dissolution of the perimeter. Okay, so once upon a time, we used to hide all our machines behind firewalls and we used to feel reasonably safe. Now people are working from everywhere. They're working from home, they're working from coffee shops, they're working from airports. Okay, we are basically sharing the network. Okay, we're sharing the network with some not nice people. Okay, so we're sharing with Russia, with China, with North Korea. I mean, fundamentally, the internet is the network that we all share today. So controlling network access is really important. Okay, now a lot of people feel that, sure, we're using a VPN, we're fine. Okay, the problem with that is you're publishing a VPN port on the internet. You might not have 10 ports open, you've got one port open, which is your VPN. But if there's a vulnerability or a problem in that VPN software or system, then you're screwed. I mean, basically, that can be exploited. Okay, so that's not the be all and end all. That's not necessarily the solution. Now, with network access control, we can create granular policies, but the really clever thing is, and I am conscious of time, really clever thing about network access control is it's not a static list of policies, okay? It's not a allow this from here, allow that from there, okay? Whether a port is open or closed depends on what's connecting to it, okay? So you can set up policies that, for example, allow all machines in a workstation or in my workstations group to connect to SMB on this machine and block everything else. So if the machine is in the workstations group, that port is open for them. If the machine is not in their workstations group, that port is closed. And that can apply to everything from remote desktop to anything else. So whether or not port is open depends on the machine that's connecting. It's not just an open and port or an open and closed port. Okay, and that is really, really useful. It is really, really powerful. And again, the point about this is everything is logged, everything is visibility or is visible. So it's not like Windows Defender where all sorts of stuff is going on and it's dug somewhere in an event log of the machine. You can see in one portal, in one place, exactly what's going on from a network perspective. So to sum up, what we've discussed or what I've mentioned to you is allow listing. Okay, what can run and what can't run. Ring fencing. Okay, these things can run. What can they do? Let's put some limits and restrictions on them. Elevation. Okay, take away those local admin rights and just let particular things elevate. Storage control, restricting what programs can access your data. And network access control. Okay, really granular, really powerful, but dynamic ACLs in terms of networking. So controlling what can connect to the machines. Couple of references from customers. Okay, I'll just leave it here for a moment. I'm not going to read it out for you guys, but these are basically some partners, some customers we've worked with who have found it to be a very beneficial experience. One thing, by the way, to bear in mind with this is when this is configured correctly, what it should mean for your average MSP is less tickets. Okay, so if you take away users' ability to do, I don't want to say dumb things, but if you take away a user's ability to do dumb things, you're going to reduce your tickets. That company I used to work for mentioned to us that they reduced their tickets by 60% in environments where ThreatLocker was deployed and secured. And I know from my own background, I mean, I'd sell a computer to somebody today and it'd be all singing, all dancing, and it's fine and it's fast and he loves it. And then 6 months later, he'd ring me and he'd go, this computer is running really slowly. Can you have a look at it? And you log in and you find out that he somehow got 15 different Chrome extensions and 5 different toolbars and 3 different antiviruses installed on the machine. And he's wondering why it's running slowly. So if you take away their ability to do all those stupid things, it should realistically mean less tickets at the end of the day. Yes, we do help check boxes for many of the common compliance frameworks. Okay, just to elude that question. And finally, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure speaking to you all. I'm 5 minutes short, so we do have a little bit of time for some Q&A.
Mhm.
We do. We have one question that's coming, and if anybody in the audience does have a question, stick that in the Q&A box. And something I like to ask the audience, particularly when there's just a few questions in the Q&A box, is you came to this webcast hoping that that Rob and Sean were going to talk about something. What's that something you were hoping they were going to talk about that they haven't mentioned? So even if you just put a topic in there, or if you have if that stems a question, that's great. Either or is fine. Mark, I think you've addressed this already, Rob, but I'm going to kind of read it. Mark was like, I get it. There's lots of cyber attacks. And he says, basically you want to know, how you can help. Now you've talked about, the ways that you help, but maybe can you take 15, 20 seconds, 30 seconds and talk about sort of where this fits maybe in a larger cybersecurity service offering, so you give Mark a better idea.
I'm wondering if Mark asked that question before I got to the
He did.
He may have, yeah. So I mean, if you feel like you answered it, then we're good.
I've answered the question since Mark, if that's okay. But as I said, how do we help by offering those controls? Okay, by blocking things from running, by controlling those tools that are on your machines, by restricting access to your data. Okay, as I said, it is very much, and somebody asked me, does it interfere with antivirus? No, it doesn't. I mean, fundamentally, we run below most of those antivirus tools and EDR tools. We run the kernel. So if you think about it, we can be the foundation that those other tools run on top of. So we say yes or no to something to be able to run. Now, if you want to have an AV checking it against signatures or definitions to see if it's good or bad, no problem. If you want to have an EDR using heuristics or AI or anything else, trying to decide if behavior is good or bad once something has been allowed to run, absolutely fine. And as I said, it could be argued that that is a well-balanced stack. That is a good approach. Mm-hmm. It is a bit of control and a bit of detection. So no, we don't interfere with those things, nor do we have problems with those things. Mac compatible. Sorry, do you want to ask the question or will I ask the question?
That's okay. You go right ahead. You're reading through them. It's all right. I don't mind.
That's fine. Yeah, I'd want it there. So yes, we do have a Mac agent. It has been in beta for some time. It has been updated to now offer basically feature for feature equivalents with the Windows. So everything I described to you just now, as far as I know, pretty much everything is available on the Mac agent also.
And we do actually
have another question about protecting NAS.
Protecting a NAS. Yeah, protecting NAS is actually a really interesting question. So it depends on where you're protecting it from. I mean, fundamentally, we don't run on a NAS, right? So there's no agent that you can run on a NAS. What we can do is we can create storage control policies from the machines in the environment to only allow, for example, as I said, 10 different programs to access the data that is on that NAS. And the other example I give, and it's actually, I am conscious of time, but something like we used to use, company I used to work for, we used to use NAS for backup. Okay, so we'd set up Windows Server Backup or Veeam or whatever it is on the server to connect to the NAS. Problem is, though, in a cyber attack, those bad guys are going to, if they get access to that server, they're going after that data. They're going after the NAS. They're going to try and wipe it, delete it, do anything they can to take that data out of play. So what you can do with ThreatLocker is set up a storage control policy, basically saying the only program running on this machine that can connect to that data on the NAS is Veeam or Windows Server Backup or whatever the case may be. So you're basically restricting their ability to use anything to delete that data or anything other than, again, hypothetically, the backup software itself. But, it needs to be able to access the data. But the short answer is we don't run on NASs, but we can protect the data that lives on NASs. And I hope that answers the question.
There's one other question came in from the chat from Robert. He says, is it okay to allow files and applications based on them being signed by a certificate, or can the certificate be hijacked and added to the malicious code?
Is it okay? We try not to, okay? So basically I work as, well, I suppose I'm part-time as a solution engineer as well. So I keep my, I dabble. We offer 5 different things, 5 different variables that you can approve something by, okay? Obviously the best and most secure and the thing that we use in all our built-ins is hashing, okay? So it is that file and that particular file. That's not always going to work with every piece of software. So software updates itself, okay? Things we don't have built-ins for. So we can create rules based on certificate, path, so the location of the file, the full file name, calling process, thing that called it, and what it was created by. So what we try and do is we create combinations of those. So it's not just one of those things. So we wouldn't say just allow everything signed by Microsoft. we'd say, look, allow it, if it's signed by Microsoft and it's a file called XYZ in this location and it's called by something else, then we combine those variables to create what we call custom rules, which are more secure than just permit something by cert.
I see one question here, FTC regulation, the safeguard rule. I can answer that just real quickly. For those who don't know, the new FTC regulations are coming in beginning of December in regards to car dealerships. So how we map to these new compliance issues are essentially, we will get you to check the box on access controls and creation of a unified audit to know what files have been accessed and by whom. So we have white papers there showing how we adhere to the new compliance through FTC, as well as GDPR, Essential 8 in Australia, CMMC, HIPAA. You know, we check a lot of the boxes when it comes to these compliance issues. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any specific questions in terms of any compliance issues.
To answer Thomas's question, sorry, just about monitoring file moving on a NAS, we can monitor it from the endpoint. We can't monitor it on the NAS, if that makes sense. So if a workstation or an endpoint or a server accesses a file in that NAS, we can absolutely monitor it. We don't have something that runs on the NAS currently.
I've just dropped my email into the chat there. I see Daniel was looking for some specifics on the document. So if anybody in the chat likes to shoot me over an email, I can get you access to whatever compliance documents you may need, or follow up any questions or any concerns at all. Let me know.
I think we've got all the questions answered, and we are 2 minutes past the hour, so we do want to respect
That's
everyone's
my
time.
fault. I apologize.
You're fired. You are never doing another webcast ever. It's fine. It was all good. We got everybody sticking around, so people are starting to drop off here. We really appreciate everyone attending today. Rob, Shane, thank you guys for a great presentation. I know that was mostly Rob, but Shane, I know you piped in there a bit as well.
Couldn't have done it without you, Shane. Couldn't have done it without you, buddy.
My jazz hand.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks to
guys.
ThreatLocker for sponsoring today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. This is going to go ahead and conclude today's webcast. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.